greatest thing I've ever done other than the birth of my children.
I've told people for years that Tevis was like a drug, and that it's one of those events that once you do it, you either are totally hooked or you'll never touch it again.
And also about riding for so many hours. I've done 100 miles before, but in about 12, 16 hours. I've never been riding for 24 hours in a row. And I hope I'm not going to be too tired. And I hope it's going to work out fine in the dark, because I've never ridden in the dark before either.
When I say the word Tevis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
The essence of the Tevis to me is soul stirring. It really moves my spirit. And there's just decades of memories that just flood together in this wash of magic that it's just so inspirational. And it always comes back to Wendell Roby for me. So that's what Tevis is about for me. It takes people to places where, I always call it, when you finish the Tevis, it's like walking through the mirror. And you can't really explain that to somebody who's never done it. Yeah. It's a magic place. And, you know, that point to point, starting up in the mountains, ending in Auburn, crossing the Sierra, they cross the mountains, you know. It's an amazing feat. I have a story for you, and it's about how I first learned about endurance, what it really meant. And it goes back to 1952. I was 5 years old. And my parents got me up very early. My sister and I got up very early. Our friends, families got up very early. And we went down to the cliffs in Palos Verdes. And we watched a woman, Florence Chadwick, come in after she swam from Catalina Island to the California coast.
Wow. And
I was 5 years old. And I watched this woman come out of the water. And everybody cheered her on and loved it. And I went, oh, that's what you do. So as my life went on, and I got involved with horses and so on, there are various things. And then I went off to a school called the Pacific Coast Equestrian Research Farm, run by Wentworth and Linda Tellington. And as all they could talk about was the Tevis Cup ride. Riding your horse 100 miles in one day. Well, I mean, I was already primed from a 5-year-old, think, oh, that's what you do. You know, that's what you do. And at that school, they taught us jumping and dressage and, you know, showing and combined training. And we went to all sorts of events. And in the spring, I was there for a year. In the spring, it was the season for endurance riding. And I started training for endurance riding. I had a great mentor, the Tellingtons, who were all about teaching you how to do things, how to get things done, how to make things happen. And I rode my first endurance ride, and I have a wonderful photo of that, of Dr. Barcelow on Good Trip, and me riding this little buckskin Mustang horse. And it's my favorite picture because we're both perfectly balanced, riding through the woods, and it's a Charlie Barrio picture.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. You know, in that story, you talked about, you know, Linda Tellington Jones, Wentworth Tellington, Dr. Barslow, Charlie Barrio. I mean, one of the reasons why I love having conversations with you, Shannon, is because, you know, the stories you have about some of the pioneers in our sport as endurance. You got a chance. You had that chance as a young lady to meet these people, and they were your mentors, and you probably idolized them because they were incredible individuals.
Yeah.
I'd like to maybe start just by talking about Wentworth, because he was an amazing horseman himself.
He was a, you know, oh gosh, where do you start with him? He had a pack string up in Canada where he would rent out 50, 60 horses at a time to the oil prospectors up in Alberta, you know. So he kept these huge herds of horses, and he knew how to look at a horse, and he'd just go this, that, and the other thing, you know. He knew exactly how to pick horses that would withstand this rigorous activity. And then he also, he went to great schools, and he was in the East. He was from New Hampshire. He was a teacher at West Point. Yeah. At the time where they had the last graduating class with the U.S. Cavalry methodology of horsemanship. So he was just an excellent horseman, and he had lots of opportunities to hone his skill. And then when he met Linda, Linda Hood up in Canada, he just immediately was smitten by her and asked her to work with him with all these horses. And so they did, but they ultimately got married, and they moved to Southern California, where he was a teacher at the Chadwick School. And she taught riding lessons. Well, at the time, he wanted to make a name for Linda in California, and how would they do that? Long distance riding. What attracted them? What got them excited? The Tevis Cup ride, Wendell Roby. What did he do best? He was a writer. Yeah. Everything they did, they wrote about it, and they wrote. They had a column in a Western Horseman magazine called Let's Go, and they wrote about this. And I call it taking a swirl up the spiral. You know, they just kept growing their gig. You know, and they found Bink Galita, the great endurance mare, Bink Galita, and off to the Tevis Cup they went, and she topped 10. And her first year, that was 1961. And 4 weeks later, they went to Oklahoma, where Linda rode the Jim Shoulders 100-mile ride in Moore, Oklahoma, and she won by 5.5 hours on the same mare, Bink Galita. That was the first time in modern history that one horse did 200-mile rides in the same year, let alone, you know, back to back like that. So that was, you know, that was pretty snappy. So they just, you know, started growing. And they grew their school, the Pacific Coast Equestrian Research Farm. And then I landed at that school in 1967, and I lived there for a year.
You were saying that they were doing a lot of clinics and trying to encourage good horsemanship with the long distance riding, with endurance. Yes. And that people would come from all over the place, right, you know, to learn more about distance riding from Went and Linda.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who understands endurance riding, once they fall for it, they would travel to the miles to go to a ride. So that included, they started doing these symposiums at the research farm in Badger, California. It was a 360 5-acre ranch that they had there. And so they would do endurance symposiums. This is way before AERC got started. So who would come to those? Phil Gardner, Pat Fitzgerald, Cliff Lewis, Ed Johnson, and with Bezatol, and all sorts of people. Ro Bailey was there. You know, there's a lot of people that got their roots nourished at the research farm.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me about your first Tevis experience as a rider.
So my first Tevis was in 1969. And I had been invited to, the previous year to ride the first Virginia City 100-mile ride. Cliff Lewis offered me a horse and I rode that. And then we did well there. And so then 69 was my first Tevis, and I rode a horse named Big Red, a slaughter pen thoroughbred horse. I had no clue what I was getting into. Didn't have a clue. And I didn't know what to drink or eat or anything.
For yourself?
For myself,
Right.
yeah. Oh, you know.
You had good mentorship from Linda and Went as far as
but
getting to the ride. But...
Yeah, but you know, I was kind of out on my own by then,
Okay.
you know, Cliff had different ideas about doing things, you know, and I was riding with him on the Tevis, and anyway, I don't recommend just drinking coffee all day.
No.
But anyway, I did not finish that year. I got as far as Todd Valley. And
oh, you were close.
Cold.
That's a tough pull.
But it was, okay, it didn't work. 1969, failure, flunked out. But I learned a lot. And what really motivated me the most is what not to do.
Yeah.
And I think, Phil Gardner always said this too. He said that when you don't finish, you learn probably more than when you do finish. So that went in the learned more category. So then I took off from endurance riding, and I spent 7 years in the thoroughbred breeding world. And I worked on breeding farms in California and in Lexington, Kentucky. And that was great. You know, that was fabulous, and still today one of my passions. So, but then I missed endurance riding. And so when I got back home to Pasadena, where I grew up, I thought, I want to, you know, I thought, what do you want? I want a Tevis buckle.
Yeah.
That was
It was burning on you.
It was, unfinished business. So I joined AERC, which was, you know, happening. I saw an ad in a magazine for it or something. So with that, you got a subscription to Saddle Action magazine.
Right.
So I'm reading through it and going, oh, this is great. And then I see this little ad in there and it says, wanted, crew member for Great American Horse Race, all expenses paid and 10% of the purse. I go, that's me. I write this.
And 10% of the purse.
And 10% of the
Wow.
purse. I write this big flamboyant letter and ship it off. Well, it was Phil Gardner's ad.
Okay.
And so he picked me as his crew member. So I moved spring of 76, 1976. I moved up to Auburn, and then we got everything all ready, and we took 2 Lanigan Arabians off on this marvelous event, the Great American Horse Race. And I crewed for Phil that summer, and it was a marvelous adventure. I have most of a book written about that, but it's still coming. So when we got home that summer, and by the way, Laurie Stewart won that, we split off and took the Pony Express Trail home with Dave Nicholson, and that's what started the whole 5-day, multi-day.
It was the birthplace of it.
Yeah, it was that, I mean, I could spend all night right on that, but I'll move right along. So we got back, and then that following year, I just trained for the Tevis. I said, damn it, I'm going to get that buckle. So I went through all the gyrations, and by that time it was Phil Gardner, Shannon, and Rick and Lori Stewart, and the four of us rode all the time, and Phil was our mentor. And so I got my first Tevis buckle in 1977. So what happened in 1977? There were about 13, 14 runners
Oh, yeah.
with the Tevis, because Gordy, as Chuck mentioned earlier, Gordy ran in 74,
Cowman in 76.
Cowman in 76, 77, there's 14 runners. And so I am so well trained, I go, oh, I got this in the bag, I know what to do. So I'm riding the ride, and hey, aren't those little runners? Hey, look at that, there's another one, hey, you know. So going into Michigan Bluff, I felt like $1 million. And I knew I had it in the bag, because our training regime amounted to, in the last weeks going into Tevis, amounted to the four of us, Rick, Lori, Shannon, and Phil, rode from Michigan Bluff to Auburn. And then on Monday, Rick Stewart and I rode from Michigan Bluff to Auburn on our backup horses. So I knew I had this. So I'm just enjoying the ride at this point. And I'm going down through Volcano Canyon, and there's Andy Gonzalez,
Yep.
this dark stranger, you know, and he's running along, and we're kind of going like this, and I'm going through Volcano Canyon, and I said, this run is going to be a hit, and I'm going to make sure it is. My exact words. So I was thoroughly entertained, learned so much watching this guy running the last 40 miles. He finished, he got to Robie Point 15 minutes after I did.
Wow.
And I was knocked out by that. Completely knocked out. I went, yay, I have a Tevis buckle, but wow, look what we have on our hands here, you know?
Right.
And so I got to know Andy, and I immediately just went, yeah. And so now the ride was over. I had my buckle, and now it was time for me to get a job. So fortunately, Phil Gardner was very good friends with Drew Barner and Wendell Roby. So Phil just said, go ask Drew for a job at the Hart Federal Savings. I said, okay, I went there. So I started working at the Hart Federal Savings, which was Mecca for the endurance riding sport. It was the home of the Western States Trail Foundation. It was, Wendell Roby, it was Drew Barner, it was Kathy Perry worked there, Hal Hall worked there. I mean, it was just endless. We were all endurance riders. The break room was just constantly filled with training your horses, how you do this, how did you do on the ride, what ride are you going to, the whole thing. So it just took off. Well, then the phone started ringing, and people were calling to see about this run.
Yeah.
Well, nobody else cared about it except me. So I fielded all those calls.
Wow.
And so, I got to talk to people that were calling from Iowa saying things like, well, my wife is mad at me, my kids don't know who I am anymore, and my friends all think I'm nuts. I'm running 80 or 90 miles a week. He says, what's going on? I said, it sounds like you're doing everything just right. I was the only voice of encouragement in their lives, And so, here Wendell Roby was saying, well, kids, here's what I have for you. I have this marvelous trail.
Right.
And there's the Sierra, which he loved, and the world is your oyster. Go out there. And so we would go out all the time. This was in the 70s.
There was something about that number, 100, that really infatuated not just riders, but then runners.
Right.
Where all of a sudden went 100 miles.
Yeah, nobody.
And it just seemed like so far, but it was possible.
Right.
And that was Wendell that said, this is possible.
And Gordy, said,
and then Gordy said,
showed
I
us.
can run it.
And people were in awe of this. And Kurt Sproul, who was one of our original directors, he says, we need to take out a full-page ad in Runner's World magazine. And I said, no, let's not. Let's, we were all endurance riders that started the 100-mile run. So I said, let's hone our skill here. Let's get good at what we're doing and let it grow from the inside out. I was adamant about that.
It was a good thing that he listened to you, because I think that's the only way that run could have evolved.
And so we let it grow organically, and all of our aid station people were endurance riders. That whole event started.
When did it split off?
It split off in 1978. We had after 77, we knew it was going to go somewhere.
Well, there was 14 runners in 77, so it's like, okay, it might double the next year, and it was interfering with the
we knew it was going to go.
At that point.
And so in the fall of 78, we had our first board meeting. We selected a bunch of people that Wendell wanted to have on the board, and I went, and I was like, I knew I had a place on that board, and Wendell didn't really know me that well at the time, and so when he read the first list, my name wasn't on that.
Yeah.
And Kurt and Mo Sproul, Mo Livermore now, and they said, Shannon needs to be on that board. She needs a seat on this board. And so he said, okay, and I think he was glad I did, But anyway, we then set a new date a month ahead of the horse ride, and then it just started growing.
It grew.
Yeah.
Something that's really fun to talk to people that were on the ground floor of, whether it was the ride and talking to you with the run, is just the enthusiasm, and what it must have felt like to feel that in the very beginnings of the run and being part of that. It must have been an amazing time for you.
I think Wendell said it best when after Monday morning after an event, I came in and I was beaming, exhausted but beaming. We had 64 runners out there, and
wow.
and everything went okay, and nobody got hurt, and he came in, and I'm sort of going through all this stuff, and he just said to me, honey, we've got a bear by the tail.
So he was excited about it.
He
too.
loved it.
He loved the run.
He loved it. He was so glad. And he also loved, he was, in his late 70s at the time. And he loved the idea that these young sprouts were coming in and going, Yahoo! We're going to make this happen. And I remember Mo and I were, we wanted everything to be so perfect. We always felt like excellence is in the details. So we would write our first brochure, which was like 4 pages, and we crafted everything, and we did in pictures right here and everything. And we took the mock-up into Drew Barner, because her opinion mattered so much to us. And we wanted to make sure it met her standard of excellence. So we took it into her, and she just looked at it and says, oh yeah, that's fine. Go on, off you go, take off. She trusted us.
Yeah.
So we were able to have the support of Wendell and Drew. And I don't know if you really know what that felt like, but it was magnificent.
Yeah.
It was magnificent for him to say, go enjoy this trail that I've created, that I've pruned back the bushes for you and marked it, and which he did in the early 30s.
And established it. Which took, it took somebody like Wendell to be able to do that.
Yeah. And it all came from his passion of the pioneers.
So there was a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm going on.
Yeah.
And it had been interesting to be in a room with Wendell and Drew, watching this evolve. Because it was all about the horse, and then it evolved into something else. And Wendell may not have ever even thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, it was interesting when people were around him. A lot of people never said anything contrary to what he was thinking. You know, his way ruled, and there was a time when I went to bat for my friend Lori Stewart when she won the Tevis. She was first, and there were some problems with something about her win, and I went in his desk and pretty much pounded on it and said, she did not do anything wrong. You know, I stood up to Wendell Roby for my friend Lori Stewart, and he really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think he was that kind of man.
Yeah.
That when somebody does stand up, you were standing up for what you thought was right.
Yeah.
And you know, and then I've also heard other stories where, you know, you did not want to upset him because it could ruin your business or anything else because he had so much power in this town of Auburn.
Yeah.
But you know, it's always fun to talk to people that knew him personally like you did, because everybody has their own really interesting stories and take on what kind of man he was. And we have to, you know, we have to talk about Wendell when you're talking about the Tevis Cup, the Western States 100-mile ride, and the run. I mean, we have to talk about Wendell.
Yeah. I mean, he was a visionary. I mean, you think about it too. He was a visionary. He was the first man in California, the first Hart Federal was the first company in California to have solar panels on the rooftop of a commercial building, because he saw that future, you know.
Yeah.
And so it operated the heating and air conditioning system in the building, which didn't always work, but you know, I mean, this was back in '76.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but he had the vision for that. He had a lot of vision, and being around people like Went Tellington.
Yeah.
Wendell Roby, Dr. Barcelow, these men that were my, you know, these role models for me were so strong, you know, and, you know, I'm the kind of person who likes to observe what's going on and see where the weak link is and go in and fix it. And strengthen whatever we have, you know. And I'm not the kind of person that you know, just does kind of everyday things. Well, I always like to be doing something significant.
And sometimes that might upset the water a little bit too.
It does, yeah, it does. It does.
Well, it's good that we have you, especially in those early days, to keep things on, you know, to help keep things on track. Yeah. So tell me about, you know, you wrote it in '77, the Tevis in '77. Did you write it again?
Yes, I wrote it in '79.
Okay.
On a marvelous horse named Heckin' Lively, and she came from Nebraska, the same breeders that...
from Rush Creek? Or?
No, they had Rush Creek mares.
Okay.
And they provided the horses for Lori Stewart that she rode on the Pony Express ride. And so, and then they just kept sending horses to Lori. And so Retro Rocket and Risky Rocket, which she ran the Tevis on, were from the Fells, Gloria and Jean Fells. And they bred this Heckin' Lively horse that ultimately I rode a few times on rides and the Tevis, greatest ride on the Tevis I had. And then she ultimately was sold to Sandy Schuler.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I rode again in '81. I rode it 4 times. I finished twice. I rode it in '81 on I was actually, and people don't realize this, but I was the ride director in '80 and '81. After Drew died in '79,
I
pretty much was doing
you took
all
over
of
the activities as a director.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I was the ride, you know, making it all happen. Didn't really have that title at that time, but I went up to Squaw Valley and or Pat Browning. Remember Pat
Oh,
Browning?
I knew
Yeah.
Pat.
Well, he said, Shannon, you don't have a horse? You should ride. You should ride. I said, oh, I don't need a horse. So he brought a horse for me. And so I, probably the first time this ever happened, I rode a blind date.
Yeah.
You know, he brought in a grade stallion named Red.
A grade stallion.
A grade stallion. And the first time I ever got on that horse, I put my foot in the stirrup, got on him, and we started the Tevis.
That's incredible.
I'm game, okay.
Uh-huh.
And I rode with Jerry Myers because Marilyn Hunter said,
Right.
If she's going to go ride, Jerry, you drive this Friday afternoon at Squaw Valley. You drive down to my place and get that Radar horse out of the pasture, come up and ride with Shannon. And so he did. We rode to Robinson Flat and had a marvelous day. But that was it. But that was
it. For both you and Jerry, or
yeah, we quit there. But that was when Roby's last ride out on the trail.
Yeah.
So we, were sort of herding him in
Okay.
as he was bailing off the,
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
I heard the story that, and I know there's probably lots of stories, different stories about that, but he snuck up there, not telling his wife, and he just entered the ride, and nobody could tell him not to.
Yeah.
And he was just determined to get one last ride in.
He had.
I might do that myself one day.
Yeah, he had several guys from the that worked for him at Hart Federal. They're helping him crew for him, and they were. I mean, you gotta admire his grit. I mean, this all goes back to that endurance thing that I saw when I was 5 years old. And, this tenacious attitude of you can do this, and so he fell off the horse, and they had to put him. It was not that pretty, but. So they got him into Roby Point, and the guys had him over here, and the horse was over there, and they said, Wendell, your horse is lame, he can't go on. And so that's,
that was it.
Yeah. But, here's this man who inspired me so much, who was like, to me, I declare him my surrogate grandfather, because while we're working in this savings and loan, he would say, I sat right outside of his office, and he would say, honey, come in here. And I'd go in, and he would sit me down in these wooden chairs with arms, and he would give me history lessons of the Sierra.
Oh my gosh.
Of where the trails went.
He just felt like he needed you to come in, and so he could tell you.
To be quite honest, the very last time I ever saw him, I was up visiting, I think it was 82, I was in California. I was living in the South Pacific at the time, but I happened to be visiting California, and I was saying goodbye to him at the elevator, and he just looked at me straight in the eye and he says, I want you to promise me you will always stay involved with the Western States Trail.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I said, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I will. So I didn't really have a choice in all this,
You made him a promise.
Yeah, and I've tried to move, buy property away from the trail, and that never works out.
You keep coming back.
Yeah, I just keep.
Well, Shannon, I look at you as a very important person because you're a keeper of our history. And you have such great stories, and you had such great experiences, and you somehow or another, however it worked out, were able to be with the right people at the right times.
I was fortunate. That's for sure.
To get to know, the pioneers of our sport.
Yeah.
And now you're an author, and you're writing books to save our history and to preserve it in print. And so your first book was Strike a Long Trot, and that's a book about Linda Tellington Jones.
With a lot of Tevis history.
Oh, well, it has to have that.
Yeah.
And about Went, which is always very fun to read about.
Yeah.
And now you said you're working on something.
Endurance Riders of the Pony Express Trail.
Okay.
Yeah. So working on that one. But I have been very fortunate, and I have to deliver a few words, 4 words that my mother, it was my mother's anthem.
Okay.
And that is never miss an opportunity.
Well, you've done well with that because, you know, you've had a chance to know these people and not just know them, but have personal experiences with them.
I'm pleased about that.
I think it's really important that you get this written down and share this history,
Well, thank
because
you.
there's very few people anymore that I know that knew Wendell like you knew him. You know, they're disappearing.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. I feel like I was in a real golden age of, you know, endurance riding and everything.
So where do you want to see the run? It has its own thing now.
The
it's
run,
going in its own direction, but
my
the ride
child,
itself,
the run has taken off.
It's taken
yeah.
off, and it's going in all different. I mean, it's just it's a world class event.
Can I mention one thing about that? How we made that happen is, you know, here Wendell taught us to love the Sierra. This is your oyster, enjoy it. When people started coming to the run, I was like, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love this. And we're gonna embrace you in a big hug, and you are now part of the Western States family.
Right.
Because you showed an inkling of interest in what this trail, what this event, what we love. You're part of it now, you know, and we just kept growing that. And now the run is huge.
Oh.
And I must tell you that years ago, I was standing out in the parking lot at Hart Federal talking to Jim Larimer, who was in, and I said to him early on, I said, you know, the run's going to get much bigger than the ride. And he says, no way, never, the ride. And I said, you just wait and see.
Yeah.
You know, and there were over 4,200 entries in the lottery to take like 260 entries last year.
Yeah.
It's huge.
It is huge.
Yeah.
Well, where do you want to see the ride go? Where do you see the future? That's a better way to ask this question, is where do you see the future of the ride?
The way I see the ride right now is I see it divided. I see it very divided, and it's too small of a community to divide. You know, there's a lot of emphasis on the foreign riders and the VIPs, and then the other people. And that whole, it just has to come back and be whole again. It's not right now, and it needs to have young people come, which they try to do with the junior rider program and everything. But they definitely need more inclusion of people.
Maybe new blood all the way around.
New blood and more love.
And more love, yeah.
Yeah, I would say. But it's a, you know, it's a, it really needs to grow, I think. Yeah. It's kind of not growing right now.
Do you, looking at just endurance as a sport, AERC, their mottos to finish is to win. And I know because you were married to Phil, and Phil this was his baby, was AERC. I mean, that slogan or motto, I grew up I mean, that was embedded in me as a young endurance rider. Do you feel that to finish is to win is still applicable?
Absolutely.
To the endurance in the 21st century?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to include everybody. I mean, I know that they have a lot more awards and things like that for the top finishers, but anybody, I mean, anybody that finishes at 4 o'clock in the morning, or 5:15 in the morning, and that's a win. You know?
Well, I mean, you're wearing your Tevis buckle this evening. I have my Tevis buckle on, and that's what we won. You know, that was what we went for.
Internationally
we wanted that
recognized,
finish with that buckle.
Yeah, and another thing about when somebody, you got a buckle, They don't ask you what was your time?
What place you came in.
What place nobody, you got a buckle.
Right.
That's a winning situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, my hat's off still to, I mean, I'm 70 years old now, so I have no interest in riding again. And to me, to want to ride it, it has to shimmy up from the bottoms of your feet all the way up to your hair follicles. You know, that's how much you want to want it.
I think I know where your passion lies though now, and that is preserving the history and sharing it. And it's, I think it's really important that our new riders, the people that come into this sport and then they set the Tevis ride as their bucket list. That's, I mean, that's their goal. Right. And I think it's really important that they understand where the root, our roots.
Right. Incidentally, in 1978, when I was talking to Wendell Roby, I said, Wendell, I think Auburn should be the endurance capital of the world. Yeah. And he said, oh, that's funny. You know, because I had a bunch of friends that started a phenomenon called couch potatoes down in Pasadena. And we used to sit around and goof about capitals of the world, you know, who knew as many. And so, you know, I got to Auburn, I see this happening, the run and the ride. Well, this is an endurance capital of the world. Well, it took until 2001 for that to actually happen, thanks to Harvey Roper. And I was in the Tevis office, working in the Tevis office at the time, and he called and said, have you ever heard of this? And I said, oh yeah, let's do it. And so we went to the city council, we made it happen. So I was a founding member of the Endurance Capital Committee, and we put on expos and parties and all sorts of things, had a great time. And then I had to go write a book, so I went away from that for a while. But now I'm back. I've started going to the Endurance Capital meetings again. So what does that mean? There's Shannon in there going, if we did that, it'll do this, and then we can do this, it'll do that, and it'll do this, and it'll go whoosh, you know.
And the goal is to get the community behind it.
Get Auburn rolling again, you know, and get the run, the ride, the other events.
Oh, we have,
you know, the run and the ride,
biking,
or the
you know, the bicycle races.
There's an event almost every weekend. Sometimes I drive through the confluence and I go, oh my God, where are all these people from? I know. Well, that's because Shannon was saying, you got to come and look at this.
You got to see our canyon.
You got to see this, And so they did. So, okay, we got people outside now. You know, that's a good thing, you know. But we really want to get the endurance capital. We've got some things cooking with that.
Very good.
And I'm happy about that.
I know you're not going to let moss grow under your feet. You are a busy lady.
I tried,
and then I appreciate, you know, your enthusiasm and what you're trying to do and the sharing of the history. And I just really want to encourage you to keep writing.
Thank you. I will.
To you know, put this history on paper so it stays around for a long time.
I will.
So thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you, and it's good to see you.
Oh, nice to see you, dear.